I want to introduce to you a good friend of ours and a longtime member of the church. Has been a real help to me. I want to tell you a story actually first. I wasn't planning on telling this, but I will just for the sake of why not? Yeah, it's fine. In my years of teaching and preaching here, one of the things that Bart actually has been very responsible for teaching me, something that I credit him, is using discernment with regard to the kinds of things that I say. And what I mean by that is there are times when I think perhaps a joke is good or there's something that I want to cover that I begin to weigh, is the payoff really worth what it could potentially, hack some of you off? And certainly I'm going to hack some of you off regardless, but I want it to be for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. And something that I've learned from him and something that I do regularly think about. And my filter, I think, is stronger because of Bart Castle. So I want to give him credit for that where credit is due. Without further ado, put your hands together. Welcome, Mr. Bart Castle.
All right. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate that. At the risk of seeming overbearing here, there are 3 administrative details to start with quickly. It's an adult learning setting. I'm not trying to insult you by saying that, but guess what? We're going to take 2 breaks, okay? Your head can only take in what your bottom can withstand. But I don't know anything about whether or not those breaks will actually match up with what your needs are. You may need more coffee, as I just joked about. You may need to use the restroom. I mean, you may be expecting a call because your, friend is watching, news stories about the Queen this morning and has a good one that you must hear right now, right? Those are all your choices, not mine. And so attend to them as you need to. The second thing is, it is Saturday morning. I have no idea what you've done this week, how late you stayed out last night, or other things like that. So, as much as I would like to think nothing that I would say would put you to sleep, that would be self-deception, which would be ironic. And you may just get sleepy, rather than which is going to be entertaining for the people at your table, but beyond a certain point, it's distracting. You miss things. So just stand up. I mean, as much as we joke about it in situations, we are a church of grace. So just stand up and go to the back of the room. Heck, stand there as long as you need. Come back to when it's time for a group exercise, you can just come back to your table. They haven't forgotten you. Don't beat yourself up about that. And then last is, if I could ask you to do me this favor, to silence your cell phone. Now, I thought I was like Derek and Kelsey and had moved mine to my front pocket, but I actually left it on the table. But I'll tell you a quick story about why I'd like you to, about silencing your cell phone and another episode of self-deception. There was a period in my life where I had the opportunity to visit with groups on a regular basis, and I was visiting with a group at Carter Blood Care about leadership. And it was a different season of my life. And so with my neck veins bulging and my eyes popping out, sweat already on my forehead, because I was all that, all right, I'm like, please silence your cell phone. And if you don't, and it goes off, you will never forget this day. Got it? And I look out there, like I'm all that. That should tip you off right away. Something was not going to go right. We're about 5 minutes into it, and I'm getting rolling, and I'm doing my thing, and a cell phone goes off very loudly. And I stopped, and I said, "Who will never forget this day?" And I'm like, come on, own it. Who will never forget this day? And I appreciate her to this day. A woman in the back kind of sheepishly raised her hand and she said, "It sounds like it's coming out of that backpack." And I'm like, whose backpack is that? And another man said, appropriately, "I think it's yours." And I looked over there and I'm like, how do you, from the middle of the room, almost the tallest person in the room, slink over to your backpack and then come back and say, I will indeed never forget this day. Okay? And so if your cell phone goes off, if you're next to them, say, he's not even boring yet. So if you would take a second and do that, in all seriousness, it's typically unintentional, but it does distract. It breaks people's train of thought. It might break mine. I have a hard enough time keeping my train of thought on the track. So if you would do those things. Regardless of the fact that Derek introduced me, some of you may be asking several reasonable questions. Who the heck are you? Where did you get that nasal twang? And does Derek owe you some money? Is that how we ended up with you? In reverse order, I am pleased to be here and humbled. Derek does not owe me money as far as I know, number one. Number two, the nasal twang is a factory install, and it was influenced additionally by growing up in Lubbock and Abilene, Texas for the first 22 years of my life. If it annoys you, take it up with God. It annoys me. I've done the same. He's not responded. And then finally, you may have additional questions about me. If those two are not helpful, I would encourage you to ask either Brian Duncan or my amazing wife, Linda. If I were to tell you, I might tell you some story that wasn't to be believed. So after all, today we're talking about self-deceit. So you may want to ask them, and they'll give you the true story. In all reality, Derek asked me several weeks ago to consider serving in this role, and it was a phone call that was surprising, and it was humbling. It was also a phone call that was the answer to a prayer that I prayed in 2014 that I don't need to elaborate on now, but I am humbled and honored to share this time with you. Quickly, I'm the oldest son of Ken and Shirley Castle. I'm also known as my mom and dad. I'm the oldest brother. Well, I said I'm the eldest son of Ken and Shirley Castle. I guess I should insert this detail. I'm the only son of Ken and Shirley Castle. I am the elder brother of two sisters, Kendra and Jana. Growing up in Ken and Shirley's house wasn't perfect. No one's house is perfect. It did allow me the opportunity to observe for 18 years two people who cared deeply about one another, who respected other people, who loved God's word, and who loved his body, and they continue to model that for me. I'm blessed that they're still here today. Life in their house also provided a number of other things. It provided stability, it provided consistency, it provided discipline, and it provided love, all of which I perceived to be boring, unimaginative, and something preventing my life from being spontaneous and fun. And I was determined that I would choose outside the lines the rest of my life from the moment I left their house. That selfish approach, frankly, that immature approach, beside being emotionally resulted in a high level of expertise, what you know as image management. I mastered it as an adult, and I eventually found out that its cost to me was extraordinary. My journey from their house in Lubbock, Ken and Shirley's that is, to today has included a good education, personal, professional, formal, informal, paid and unpaid leadership in organizations, employers, trade associations, ministries, and high school and college sports, which if you know me, you know I love. Sadly, especially for Ken and Shirley and everyone else who was associated with me, including my now 3 young adult children, Ashton, Alexis, and Andrew. Most of the years prior to 2014 included incredible selfishness, immorality, including infidelity that mortally wounded 2 marriages, and the emotional maturity that would approximate that of your average 18-year-old. Virtually, one of the ironies of that entire time, and one of the paradoxes of that entire time, is virtually all of it, save for 10 months when I was a doctoral student at Madison, Wisconsin, which I left to try to restore an already mortally wounded first marriage, during which time I had never been drunk and decided I was in Wisconsin, I would do as the Badgers do, and don't remember some of that time. I was a part of a church. In most instances, part of the lay ministry of a church. Unfortunately, and part of why we're talking about this today, is because talking about truth can be part of the lingo and the dance at a church. I mean, church crap, I'm not taking the advice I gave to Derek, can keep us from seeing truth. It's easy, in my experience, to talk about truth and being truthful. It actually, even here at City, for me, and I suspect for some of you, is harder to do. Because truth is painful. Sometimes it can be, because truth is painful in most cases. It is something often we avoid. I'm going to talk later about understanding the difference between the pain of one thing and another. But because we often don't, which is part of a truth, we avoid that. But truth, what does Jesus say truth does? It sets us free. And so the self-deception that ruled my life kept me bound. And I'd lie if I didn't say that I was occasionally subject to it. But I'm going to deputize you late in the morning to hold me accountable to not doing that. So what we want to do today is to continue to build on the mission of the church to blunt self-deception. Enough about me. Let's talk quickly about where we're going. First, I have four objectives. I do have four objectives, but I love a saying by the humorist Mark Twain. How many of you have heard of Mark Twain? Everybody? That's just a check to see if you're still awake at this early point. All right? And Mark Twain has the famous quote, "It ain't what you know, it's what you know. It ain't what you know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that ain't so." Let me say that again. It ain't what you know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know that ain't so that causes problems. And to me, that really, I know it's not biblical, but it's kind of fun. And it's one of those sayings that's, oh yeah, that's a funny saying. But if you really think about it, there is tremendous depth in that saying. Think about me in the backpack. Was it that my cell phone went off that really created the problem? What was it that created the problem? What was so that I didn't know? What was I was acting like that wasn't so? It had to be somebody else. What? I would be a fool to leave my cell phone turned up, and I absolutely was positive I hadn't. Or was I? And as I said, I've not forgotten. My promise came true. Whoever's phone went off was not going to forget that day from that day forward. And indeed, I have not. That doesn't mean I haven't been foolish on other instances, but I don't have my cell phone go off in places where it shouldn't very often. Honey, check my cell phone and make sure it's turned down. All right. With that said, today I do want to try to accomplish four things. And that is, first, to settle the issue of who's a leader. Next, that I think it can be illustrated from God's word that all of us are affected by self-deception. All right? All of us are affected by self-deception. And I'm not trying to use you instead of me. It is my assertion that God's word suggests that it's not just a Bart with a nasal twang problem. Third, to discuss what self-deception might look like in terms of answering that question, if you will. it's not just a Bart problem. And then finally, what I want to do is have us to look at and discuss and actually apply some specific tools that help blunt the impact or mitigate the likelihood that I might be drawn into and regularly practice self-deception. And I can tell you part of the reason you don't want to is not just the biblical case, but as I said, I want to restate it. I mean, self-deception is incredibly expensive to you and to those people that you know, your actions reflected toward. And so we want to try to do that really as the overarching perspective. So let's first settle the issue of who is a leader. I wouldn't consult my notes often, but it used to be one of the ways that I self-deceived, that I didn't need them, and I was regularly way off time. And so I don't want to do that. Now, they're printed double-sided, so if you see me flipping back and forth, it's not that my eyesight's bad or I'm missing the bifocal of my glasses. It's that I've got the pages out of order. Some of you may still be thinking, though, I'm not really sure. I don't know if I'm a leader. I mean, I just came because I had a free Saturday morning and I heard there was food. All right? Some others of you may think I'm absolutely a leader. All right? Regardless of whether you're on the I'm absolutely a leader, paid or lay, or I just had a morning free and I heard there was food. All right? Regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, there's good news and bad news. All right? It's Saturday morning, so let's start with the good news. All right? The good news is there is food, it's tasty, and it was free, at least to you. The other part of the good news is you'll still have most of Saturday left when we're finished. All right? That's the good news. What's the bad news? You're like, oh man, where is this going? And the bad news is this morning I'm going to assert, and we're going to talk about the fact over the next few minutes, that if I'm a Christ follower, the issue is not, am I a leader? Right? That really is not on the table. The issue is how effectively I lead, or if you want to use a different word, influence other people, not if I do so. Because even without knowing all of you intimately, or some of you at all, I can tell you, you could be an axe murderer, and I'm not being facetious, and you would still be influencing somebody at some point. And so again, the question is not if. None of us get to default and say, okay, as soon as the food's over and the jokes go bad, I'm out. Okay? Because we are going to lead or influence. And Jesus makes that case, and we're going to look at it. But it's the thing we really have to settle for ourselves so that we are more conscientious and effective at doing so. Jesus, like I said, lays out the role. Interestingly, in a verse that you hear often here. It is the A part of Matthew 5:14, early in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus simply makes this statement that for me, has been easy to miss as somebody who's been in church virtually the entirety of his 62 years. And that is, Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. I think it's easy as a reader in very affluent Western America in 2022, even though America's not perfect, to think salt? Come on, Jesus, salt? Are you kidding me? Boring, plain, pedestrian. However, is that how it was heard? And is that how I should think about it? Plain, boring, pedestrian, and this is supposed to be all Bart's got? Surely he owes Derek money, right? The reality is, to the people sitting on the hill that day, they had no Whirlpool. They had no LG. They had no Viking. No refrigerators. No refrigerators. Salt was so valuable in the ancient world, some cultures used it for money. I mean, today on a cop show, they would show a brick of cocaine. In the ancient world, they'd have shown a block of salt in the back of somebody's chariot. All right? It was literally money. It was valuable. And so when Jesus says, Bart, you are salt, what's he saying? You are valuable. He knew the part I read you about selfishness, about immorality and infidelity, about just generally being a knucklehead for a long time, about insulting people about their cell phone when I was the fool whose cell phone was on. And he still said, you are the salt of the earth. He didn't say if. He didn't say, Bart, if you'd like, be salt. He didn't say to the people on the hill, and think about the people on the hill. They were a mixed crowd. All right? But they were image bearers because that's what God said back in the garden. And so he didn't say if. Salt is valuable because it makes things like lunch possible. All right? Its absence or its use after it was diminished 2,000 years ago not only meant no lunch. I mean, if you ate spoiled food, what could it have meant? Not only no lunch that day, no lunch no more. All right? You would die. And so it was very, very valuable. It seems God didn't say if. He said if we're image bearers of God. And who are image bearers this morning? Us? Is that because we're here in the church? Is that because we're saved? What is it? Why is it because? Because God created us. And he said in Genesis, I'm going to create you in my image. And that point about who is image bearers, let me just suggest, is coming back around. Okay? So we're all image bearers. It seems reasonable to argue then that image bearers are salt. They have no choice. That's part of how we were created. As such, the question is really, do I preserve, protect, and make ready for presentation to my Father? Or do I diminish and damage and possibly destroy other people? That's really the question I have to answer today. Not only if I'm here, but in life in general, because I am a person who leads and I am a person of influence. Alternatively, if you think back to last year's conference, we talked about your shape, all right? Your shape. This is our family. This is our family, okay? My wife, me, incredibly important, all right? Or my star, like goes off into the atmosphere, all right? Alternatively, if you look about it, Jesus doesn't say, hey, you, whatever, fill in your own shape, all right? You're valuable. The other shapes are not. He didn't say that. He didn't say triangles. Isn't triangle one of them? I think I'm right. Triangle, a square, a star, and a circle. He didn't say, hey, you circles are salt. You stars are salt. No, he just said, Bart, you're salt. He also didn't give preference to disposition, whether I'm an introvert or an extrovert. He didn't give preference to what my role or title is, whether I'm a professional Christ follower, I'm a lay Christ follower, I'm a manager, a leader of some kind in an organization. He didn't give preference to that. And finally, he didn't give preference to arena of life. It's my personal life. Well, this applies at work. Or have you ever noticed this? Well, this only applies at church. And then we go to a sporting event, and suddenly, as one of my reffing colleagues used to say from years ago, funny thing about those Christians, it never seems to apply once they get to the gym. And that's a sobering thing to think about. All right? So he didn't say that. He simply said, Bart, you're salt. So this morning, quickly, rather than think about whether or not you're salt, you might want to just reconsider. Maybe if you're still not convinced, maybe just think about yourself as a different variety of salt. Maybe you're sea salt. Maybe you're Himalayan pink salt. Maybe you're table salt. And the unfortunate reality is that pridefully some of yourself can assert, I'm rock salt. Okay? I'm rock salt. So regardless of the variety, you're salt. You're a leader to someone. You get to choose what kind of follower that you are. So I hope that gives you some notion that all of us have a responsibility to understand the connection between leadership and self-deception, because we all are one. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter to whom and how we execute that responsibility. The second thing, the second part of what I want to do this morning is talk a little bit about the biblical case. Now, just like some of you were skeptical about being a leader, some of you may be skeptical, he's throwing around Bible verses. He's just guilty of the same church stuff like he was his cell phone. And that's a reasonable question. But again, I think it is important to understand that self-deception is really a foundation problem. It's almost a meta problem, if you will, on which other problems sit. Think about it. Where did self-deception first happen? Where? In the garden. And we always get confused. We ask ourselves, is it the chicken or the egg? That's dumb. What's the real question? Was it Adam or Eve? I mean, that's the real question. But it doesn't matter. It happened in the garden. Because before either Adam walked away, all right, God said, I'm going to give you this person and you're going to be a pair. You'd think he'd have stuck sticker than glue on paper. All right, but he's like, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And apparently he walked off. Or he walked far enough away that someone else's influence could have a material impact on Eve. And then I don't know what she was thinking. Maybe she was thinking, why did he bring me that guy? Does he know him? Overlooking the fact that God was saying, no, and I made him. All right? But it happened in the garden. It happened in the garden. You've heard me talk long enough, and the twang is getting obnoxious. So let's get you involved. Here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do. As a table group, does anybody not have a group at their table? Looks like we've all got a group. As a table group, here's what I want you to do, and I'll tell you what the letter on your table is in just a moment. All right? As a table group, I want you to discuss the characters in the situations in the verses that I'll show you. The letter on your table. Everybody see their letter? Hold your letter up. Let me make sure we're all on the same page. All right? That way, just in case some of you didn't go to the back of the room when you got sleepy. All right? And here's what's going to happen. At your table, the other thing you need to do is everybody needs to look under your chair. And if you have, I believe, Kelsey, it's a pink sticky note. All right? If you have a pink sticky note, you are the facilitator at your table. All right? And so if you're at a table and neither of you have a sticky note, I'll appoint you one, or you can just do it yourself. All right? All right, here's what you're going to do. Everybody got that issue settled? Everybody got that issue settled? And what you may want to do, I'll leave it up to you. If you're at a small table and you want to move, you can do that. Maybe to get out of being the facilitator. I don't know. All right. So here's what we're going to do. Who has an A at their table? All right. If you have an A at your table, I want you to look at these two scenarios. And again, you're going to discuss briefly how the characters in those scenarios deceive themselves. If you're an A table, you're going to look at, and somebody's got to have a phone on at least their Bible, I'm guessing, Genesis 4:19 through 24, which is a story about a cat named Lamech and his wives and his violence. And you're going to look at a story in Genesis 11:1 through 4, about the Tower of Babel. Okay? You got that if you're an A? Genesis 4:19 through 24. And Genesis 11:1 through 4. All right? That is table A. All right? And again, you're going to read it quickly and then discuss how are the characters deceiving themselves. If you're a B table, quickly. Oops, other sheet of paper. You're going to look at Genesis 12, 10 through 16. You're going to be looking at a story about Abram, Sarai, and a little trip they took to Egypt. And in Genesis 18, 10 through 15, you're going to look at a story about three strangers, Sarah and a lie. B tables, you got that? All right. Genesis 12, 10 through 16, Genesis 18, 10 through 15. You got those stories? All right. Any C tables? All right. C tables, you're going to look at Genesis 20, 1 through 10, a story about Abraham, Sarah, and Abimelech, and a story in Genesis 29, 15b through 27 about Laban, Jacob, and brides. All right? So look at those passages quickly, read them to yourselves, or read it as a group, and just discuss how did the characters deceive themselves in those stories. All right, what Kelsey's going to do is he has our talk box. Is that the technical name for it? The catch box. I knew I would miss that. The catch box. And I'm just going to ask, and we won't ask, we're just asking for one, okay? We will go through all the A's quickly, the B's, and then the C's. Who's an A table? All right, here we go. You can just hand. And then once you're finished with the box, speak into the top of it. You just throw it to the next table, all right? So if you're the facilitator at the table and you don't catch well, part of your job would be to delegate the catch box, the catching of the catch box to somebody else. All right, let's see. And quickly, here are our stories. A groups we're considering Lamech. He talked about wives and violence, and the quick summary is, where did polygamy start in the Bible? And it appears that the answer is right here. All right? In one of the early chapters in Genesis. God never said, nor did he say after this, more than one wife was a good idea. And if you've ever been in a situation where you had more than one significant relationship going on at a time, you would know it is a really bad idea. All right? And then their other story was the Tower of Babel, which most of us are familiar with. So, what's one of the deceptions from each piece?
With Lamech, we came up with he was very full of himself.
Okay. He said, hey, I'm all that. I'll ask whose cell phone. All right?
Yes.
What was another one?
And then the Tower of Babel, we decided that the people decided without, they took it upon themselves to decide what to do without consulting God.
Okay. Hey, I talked to God. What does he know?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, ladies.
You're an A?
Who's an A? All right.
Going out for the Cowboys.
All right. So self-deception that's a self-deception. Go Cowboys. Go ahead.
For Lamech, we had, he was puffed up, for one. He thought he was even more important than Cain, that he could avenge himself.
Okay. Hey, Cain just killed one person. What about several? Sounds like a great idea.
And then for the Tower of Babel, we had thought they had the ability to choose their own destiny.
Okay.
Really
Choosing our own destiny. Okay. Anybody ever known someone like that? In your mirror. Who's another A table? All right, here we go. Going to require quite a heave. All right. All right.
So for the first one, I immediately said when we read it that he self-deceived himself that he could handle more than one wife.
That's right.
But
that more than one wife was a good idea.
The further we went in, Jason read some of the context, and he self-deceived himself that he was justified in killing.
Okay. Hey, people made me mad.
And then for the Tower of Babel, they deceived themselves that they could actually build a tower to heaven.
Okay. All right. Good. Next A table.
Okay, just the catcher. Okay, yeah, for the Lamech thing, we said that, he made a claim that he would be avenged 77 times So kind of being his own voice of God, with that one. And then for the Tower of Babel, we put, no one can stop us if we build this tower.
Okay. No one can
Yeah.
stop us. All right. New technologies, and the brick was a new technology in Babylon. What do we do with new technologies? Oftentimes it's self-deceptive. This technology is great. It has no downside. Okay? That's what they thought about a brick. I mean, think about it. Bricks are not new to us, but if you lived in Babylon and say, hey, more than one story, we have bricks. All right? Who else is an A? No other A's? All right? What about B's? Who's a B? Okay? Throw the catch box to a B. All right? And B's are talking about Abram, Sarai, and Egypt. All right? Abram, Sarai, and Egypt. And quickly summarize, they were headed to Egypt, and Abraham said, honey, it's dangerous in Egypt, so we're going to act like you're my sister. And literally the text says, and it will be good for me. Okay? B's? Who's got the catch box?
We put is that loud? We put that Abram's self-deception was that he was protecting Sarai when he was really protecting himself, and possibly that he was responsible for the success of God's plan.
Okay. Honey, I know it sounds bad, but I'm really protecting you. It's you I'm concerned about. Okay? All right. And then what about for three strangers and a lie?
Sarah's self-deception was that she could hide her mockery from God.
Okay? If you remember that story, I mean, there were three strangers that came to talk to Abraham, and she heard them over talking. She overheard them talking. Not easy for me to say. And they mentioned a baby, and she started laughing. And then God said, did you laugh? Nah, not me. It was him. All right. Next B table.
So one is that Abraham thought pretty much the same thing they just said. His wife's beauty was going to save him.
What's that?
That his wife's beauty was going to save him.
Yes. That's a great observation. You're so beautiful, they won't even notice me. All right.
Yeah. And then the second part is that she didn't believe that she could have a baby, even though God said she could.
Okay. She didn't think God. I mean, isn't there such thing as practical atheism? And what do I mean by that? I'm an old lady, man. God can't pull this off.
And neither can Abraham, because she didn't believe that part either. This old man.
Absolutely. Leslie will be here all week. All right. Who's another B table? Oh, man.
I can't throw it way down there.
Do a relay. Oh, here we go. All right. Okay. What are some of the self-deceptions you all observed?
No problem. So kind of the same thing, that by her lying and saying that she was his sister, that it was going to benefit him. And I mean, it kind of did benefit him, but he lost the relationship because she still went to Pharaoh's house. And then on the other one, I mean, kind of same things that were already said, is that she didn't believe that she could get pregnant even though God said it, and that she deceived herself thinking that God didn't hear her laugh.
Right.
So.
It's back to the garden. I mean, isn't it? Hey, we're going to hide behind this bush, and he won't see us. All right. He could just unmake the bush, and there you'd be. All right. Who's another B table? Okay.
Ditto. No, I'm just kidding. For the Abraham and Sarai one, I mean, basically, just, God is the one that led them to Egypt. And then, but once they got there, he went ahead and had to take control and make sure that God's plan went ahead, and God, he's going to make sure that God's plan gets done whilst protecting himself. God cannot protect me. I'm going to have to. And then for, yes, the laughing. There it is. I didn't do that. I mean, how many times do your kids do that? I didn't hit her.
Right.
It's like you're terrified of of getting in trouble. But also thinking about before, like the whole time she was, physically able to get pregnant. I mean, how crazy do women get when they can't get pregnant during that time? She probably took control during that
Okay.
time. And then now this time it's like been however long since she's been biologically able to have a child. And now is the time that God chooses, because she literally has no control. She can't do anything about it. And so, she probably deceived herself during that
Sure.
time of when she was physically able to have the baby.
Good points. Another B. I think this is our last. Okay.
Ours was really simple on the first one with the lie. We just thought they were deceiving themselves in the fact that they didn't have to trust God.
Okay.
And really that for both of them. They were trusting what they thought instead
Okay.
of, their plan instead of God's.
Any of
Although
us
he had
ever
given
taken
them
the
a
wheel
plan.
from God? Where was Carrie Underwood in the Old Testament when they needed her? Okay. C's. Oh, there's one more B table. Oh, are you C? B. Okay.
In the first one, that we said that Abraham was prideful in that he didn't believe God could provide or protect his family. And in the second one, it was Sarai's disrespect and then the cover-up,
Okay. And
which led them to lead their child Isaac, which means the last laugh.
All right, and I think that takes us to our C tables. Where are they? Okay, here's a C table. We've got 3 of them, it looks like. Oh.
Yeah. Hey, wow, it works. So in ours, the first case was where Abram lied to Abimelech about his wife being his sister, and he did that out of fear. And so I guess the principle that would come out of that is self-deception is a product of self-fear or self-preservation. And then in the second one, in Genesis 29, 15b through 27, Jacob and Laban were discussing, what Jacob could do, because Jacob really loved Rachel, and he promised to work for Laban, and Laban committed to give Rachel to Jacob, but Laban was actually lying to him. He was deceiving Jacob. And so basically Laban lied to get his way. So I guess the second principle would be self-deception is also a product of trying to get your own way.
Okay.
And the other thing we noticed is that for Abraham, he seems to be a repeat offender, because he did this before as well. So.
All right. Who else is C table quickly? All right, over here. And then was there one other C table?
How does this work?
Okay.
On the second one, on the first one, we said, the self-deception was pretty much Abraham's self-deceit was not trusting in God, which basically came down to fear.
Okay.
Because in the end of those verses, God actually saved both Abimelech and Abraham.
All right.
From that. On the second one, basically, Jacob's self-deception was, he thought Laban deceived him, but Jacob didn't know the laws of the land. He just assumed what was right was going to go. Because Laban said, in my country, the firstborn always comes first. So I guess it's kind of like ignorance of the law is no excuse, even if what you think's right.
Okay, self-justification, all right. Just out of curiosity, in that Laban and Jacob story, do you think that sets up good future in-law relations? Surprise! I'm not her. Okay. All right, next, who else is a C table?
With the Abraham and Abimelech, of course, just Abraham believing that his control and his thought process was better than God's as far as protecting himself. With the Jacob and Laban thing, Jacob, based on experience, was lying to himself that Laban was trustworthy, first of all, but then that Laban could have had the self-deception that he was helping his older daughter by deceiving Jacob in the first place and giving her first, even though, as we will see later on in life, it worked out really bad for her.
Seems like we've heard that I am helping thing before. All right?
I think we beat the first one to death on that one, that basically he was taking care of himself. He lied. He thought he knew more about it than God did. But on the second one, comes to me, isn't that the same guy that had a brother named Esau way back?
Yes.
Yeah, so what comes around goes around, huh? Just saying. Maybe I read too much into that one. But the other thing is, he was kind of a little bit ignorant, wasn't he? I mean, if I was chasing somebody for 7 years, I think I would know pretty much about her. And I don't care how drunk I got, I would pretty much know. Because in that culture, they have like a 7-day wedding before they get to consummate it. And then I guess the last thing would be, how in the world would you know that that was not the woman that you were waiting on? You know?
So it sounds like Jacob not only lied, but lied to himself as well. All right, I think we have a C table left, or do we have two?
Any more C's?
Any more C's?
Okay.
All right. If you look at the board, and what I wanted to do is, some of these stories are a bit uncomfortable to look at in this light. It's easy to spread them with kind of church veneer and not really see what's going on in these stories and how powerful and really how silly the self-deception is. And I mean, the one that strikes me, and I included in the set, but really is that one with Abraham, Sarai, and Egypt. And then even, and I think an important point to think about in terms of the biblical case for self-deception affecting even people that we consider faithful and we tell primarily faithful stories about. In the second story where he said, look, trust me, honey, this is going to be better for you and me. He was Abraham. He was not Abram anymore. God had already blessed him and made him the father of his people. And he was still beset, not only with self-deception, the same self. You got to think that second time. I mean, even maybe one of Sarah at that point, self-deception was, well, maybe we just didn't spin it right the last time. You know that thing at Pharaoh's house, it didn't seem like it was working out, but maybe this one's going to be different. I mean, and then finally, in terms of the biblical case, quickly, you know, perhaps the most vivid portrait is Paul in the 7th chapter of Romans, where he's talking about, I know I should do this, but I think I'll do this. I don't think I'll do this, but I think I should do this. And it seems like to me that these stories in Paul say these things about self-deception and the potential to deceive myself. One, it's going to happen. Two, it's usually irrational, despite the fact that it's going to happen. Three, at times, especially if you listen to Paul, it seems almost out of my conscious control. That itself is a self-deception, but it feels that way. And then finally, it's going to typically require more than trying to handle it by myself. Because Paul is talking about here, hey, I wrestle with this. It seems clear that the choice I have to make as an image bearer with regard to self-deception is, do I accept it and wrestle with it honestly, or do I deny it and have it keep coming back around? Because those two things seem to suggest that. Quickly, and then we're going to take a break. Social scientists who wouldn't describe this in biblical terms suggest that I deceive myself to boost my self-esteem or to feel better about myself. And they continue that by saying, whether it's to myself or it's other people, deception is a way for me to avoid really being known by other people. Really being known by other people. And so that notion of vulnerability that comes from the garden, quick, let's hide, it is something that even secular scientists recognize. You may be asking quickly, and then we're going to go to a break, hey, is a discussion like that? I'm not completely persuaded by the biblical case. Is this really necessary? Well, it's necessary for a few reasons. Number one, it's in our DNA at City. It's in our DNA. We talk about freeing people from bondage, and this is the meta problem to that bondage. And so we need to. Then the other thing is, it may be that you're struggling self-deception. If you've ever heard yourself asking these questions, think about them a minute and chew on them as we go to the break. Number one, you may be self-deceived, to parrot Jeff Foxworthy, only he wasn't talking about self-deception, if I regularly find myself making assumptions about others based on a small number of words or attributes. I may be finding myself self-deceived if I'm finding it more difficult to remain fully engaged without making statements to those before whom I appear to disagree have finished their statement. So I'm cross-talking, right? I may be self-deceived if I'm concluding that a conversation with someone else about a difficulty is not even worth having even before I've had the conversation. Talking to them is not going to make any difference in the world. I may be self-deceived if I'm embellishing stories, events, or experiences that I've been a part of or I've not been a part of to impress other people or to make myself look better. And then a last one to think about is if I'm saying things like, I don't really need regular accountability in my life. I don't have any issues going on that would benefit from accountability. If any of those things touch on me, I likely need to consider self-deception, okay? Let's take a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and continue on. We looked at God's Word, and it's pretty clear. I mean, I'm not the only one doing dumb things like saying whose cell phone is ringing, all right? Ladies, just a quick summary. I mean, if there's a man in your life and you were married and he said to you, I know this is going to sound odd, honey, but here's how this is going to work, okay? We're going to Montana, and it's dangerous there. Here's how we're going to handle this. When we cross the state line, we're going to act like we've barely met. Somebody may want to sleep with you. You're pretty attractive. So you're going to let them until we get out of Montana. And then we'll fix up whatever transpired while y'all were together. I mean, to even hear somebody describe it sounds like what? Nuts. Nuts. And if you're a woman, you're like, we would never recover from the request, much less ever getting to Montana. All right? All right. Now, ladies, this is God's Word. I don't make this stuff up. The jokes are not all mine. Okay? And so you've had that. Somehow you survived it. And there was no such thing as a freedom group that I'm aware of in the Old Testament. All right? And several years later, your partner comes to you and says, honey, I've got an idea. Okay? I know the last time it didn't work out exactly like we hoped, and it took a while to get past it. But it's been a while. I got a new spin on it. We're new people. I'm Abraham and you're Sarah. I mean, I'm confident this is going to work. Let's give it a shot. Okay, ladies, you buying it? And here's what's crazy. Before you let yourself off the hook and think, men, cretins, why can't you let yourself off the hook? She did it. I mean, she did it. Okay? So, I mean, men, women think we're crazy because we are. Women, we think you're crazy because you are. All right? So, I mean, we're all in this self-deception boat. not because a social psychologist who is, in some cases, an atheist says that from their research, because God's Word makes it abundantly clear that that's the case. So that being the case, and then those other questions that I asked were some ones, if you were still skeptical, probably at least one of them, you're like, that one's getting a little too close to home. Or you just said, yeah, I'm that one, I'm that one, I'm that one, I'm that one. Okay? So we're all in the self-deception boat. Now, how are other ways we deceive ourselves that have specific names? The first one we want to talk about this morning, that notion, and if you're following along on your program at home, we're down to, are there potential tools? Okay, self-deception affects the people close to me, the people over whom I have influence with, finishes that last bullet. But we're going to talk about some tools. Again, there's good news and bad news. Okay, the good news is these tools are powerful and they will help mitigate the temptation I have towards self-deception. The bad news, at least that's the way most of us will see it, is that they require diligence, they require hard work, and they require that the diligence and hard work be sustained. Okay, and it's my experience personally. Maybe you and I are wired differently. That as a general rule, as humans, we are not prone to really be fans of hard work, okay? As the youth pastor said when I was a young person during a fleeting moment when I was listening one Sunday, if digging ditches, although I was very good at appearing as I was listening, okay? Because I knew the Bible answers, and remember, the Bible can be approached like an encyclopedia. Is the Red Sea north or south of the Dead Sea? Is this town east or west? And I memorized those things so I could be half listening and still spitting out, encyclopedia answers. But he said, hey, we were talking one time about the reality of sin, and he said, if digging ditches were sin, how many of you would have a problem with it? And I mean, everybody's like, oh man, if it were only that easy, okay? Because I don't know many people, there probably are some, but that volunteer, and when he said digging ditches, we were teenagers, man. None of us had ever seen an auger. The only kind of post holes we'd ever seen was, and nobody signed up for that. Most of us did it because we were in trouble if we'd done it at all. And the same thing is true, of almost any other kind of sin. So one of the ways that we self-deceive is we put people in a box. Okay? And we're going to talk about it. Let me illustrate it this way. All right? Imagine this scenario. All right? You're pooped. It's been a long week. It's already been a challenging morning at your house. You get to city on a Sunday morning and you're by yourself. You don't see any of the people that you usually sit with or that you know. And the seats appear to be almost entirely full because it's a big Sunday. All right? But then you see 3 seats at the end of a row, but you don't know anybody on the row. First, everybody got that in their mind? All right? So you're cruising, you see 3 seats, you're like, don't know them. All right? So first, think to yourself, what do you do? Then I would say, regardless of where you sit, so I'm making an assumption there that you do at least make the choice, well, crap, I got up and came, so I'll stay. Okay? So you sit in one of those 3 seats, as uncomfortable as it may have been. Once you're seated, you look up and you see somebody coming down the aisle who is also looking for a seat. What do you do regardless of where you're sitting? All right? What do you do if the person looks similar to you? How they're dressed, their race, whatever. What do you do? What do you do if it's a person carrying a very young, unkempt-looking child? What do you do if the person seems unstable in some way? Finally, what do you do if the person seems dressed inappropriately in some way. Now, let me ask you a question. Are any of those a bit uncomfortable? Just as you think of yourself in that spot. And I'm going to ask you to peel off the church nonsense. I'm not opposed to church. I've been here 62 years, and Christ, through the church and his death, saved my life physically and otherwise. About the only two things I've been spared, I spared myself, were incarceration and death because of self-deception. All right? Those are about the only two things I missed. So I'm not anti-church. One, because I didn't invent it, right? So that's not what it is. But thinking past jargon, do any of those things make you uncomfortable? Any of those scenarios? Right? I ask you that, and I want you to hold that in your head when I ask this final question. Is there anything potentially in common about how you viewed the individual looking for the seat in all of those scenarios? And the answer for most of us, myself included, is yes. And that yes is, I put them in a box. And how did I do that? I did that by operating and behaving out of likely assumptions I had about that person. And that's one of the things we do as humans. We make assumptions about people. And one of the things that we often forget is assumption should be a synonym for danger of self-deception. Right? We make assumptions, according to scientists, because we have to process a lot of information at a time, and so assumptions are shortcuts. All right? So it's not that we're not going to make them, it's are we careful? And here's what happens. Once I put the person in the box, okay, I am doing several things that are diminishing, damaging, or destructive, right? Number one, in most cases, I'm treating them like an object, not a person. And more to the point of our conversation today, I'm treating them like an object instead of an image bearer. Does that make sense? All right. Those assumptions have me treat them like an object. Oh, whoops. An image bearer. I don't know about you, but when I really allow myself to think about that, that's uncomfortable because I have done so. I have done things like, see if you can, maybe even imagine yourself in the scenario, trying my darndest not to make eye contact with the person. Okay? Or I've got my Bible with me, and if I slid it over here into this seat beside me, maybe they won't sit in it because they'll think it's occupied. Or there's two of them, and for whatever reason, maybe just to be ornery again, I've acknowledged that about myself, I slid clear into the third seat just to see if this person will try to scooch closer over to the person next to them because they don't know me. But that leaves two seats. But maybe rather than moving my Bible, maybe I just move myself back into the middle seat, so now there's a seat on either side of me, which doesn't really look inviting, especially if you're the person with a child. All right? Do any of those sound like real things someone you know might have considered? Okay? All right? So I'm treating them like an object rather than an image bearer. The other thing that putting them in the box does, it allows me to rationalize the actions I'm taking. I'm saying ugly things back to you because you said ugly things to me. Okay? All right? Different scenario. Anybody you might have met ever use that rationalization? Okay? That's evidence that I've got the person in the box. The last thing it says quickly this morning is, it literally says that my image of the person or my view, you could use either term here, is incorrect. Why so? How does God see them? See, like, oh, that person is dressed oddly. Why in the world are they here? Did they not read the rules? It may not be 2020. It may be 2022. But they could have come up with something better than that. Okay? I mean, think about it. And here's another thing is, have any of us ever said to a child, you know, it's lucky that you got home 1 minute before the curfew? Think about that. Think about that. Is that what God said? Man, you are so lucky. You just did profess faith before I was going to nuke you. Okay? He didn't say that. I mean, is that what the story of the prodigal son says? You're lucky you loped your ornery behind in here. I was going to give that cow to your brother. Okay? That isn't what that story says. That story doesn't even tell us how long the person was gone. It could have been years. And the dad didn't say, wow, another 2 weeks, I wasn't coming out here to the porch to look for you anymore. He doesn't say that. Right? It doesn't say that. So to any of those people, it's so easy to fill my head with the same kind of self-deceptions, like, is it going to be safe with an unstable person? I don't think God asks us to willy-nilly not have our self-regard in some part of the frame. But I do think he asks us not to have it dominate the frame. And that's hard. That's hard. Think about the stories we read in our groups. And in all those cases, what was happening, people were putting other people or themselves in the box. All right? So how do we prevent that? How do we prevent that? There's a number of ways. So I'm going to give you some quick trips. I mean, likely all of us, based on Paul's statement, will struggle to keep from putting people in the box. But here are some quick tips, and we'll go on to the second one. Number one, make a priority of learning people's names. Now, almost certainly some of you have said, I'm just no good at names. Okay? Let me ask you the same. Let me share something with you quickly. When I was a sophomore in high school, I lived with a fellow named Danny Dixon, and he was remarkable at names. And I said to him one day, we were roommates, I said, man, I'm just not good at names like you are. And this was almost a cell phone in my backpack moment for me. And he said to me, it's because people don't matter to you. And I'm like, what? I am going to the Dean of Student Life's office right now, and I'm getting this cat out of here. Okay? And I'm like, that is bullcrap. And that, actually, I wasn't quite that diplomatic, but trying to remember the advice I gave Derek. And so, you know, but he said, no, what I mean is part of your brain unconsciously knows if you know their name, you are accepting some responsibility for how they really are. And I'm like, how did he learn this? He grew up in Fort Stockton. They're Hicks in Fort Stockton. They're not sophisticated like we are in Lubbock. Okay? But I want you to think about that. That's a quick trip. Learn people's names. It is an acquired skill. Will you ever be as good as Danny? No. But it's no different than playing a piano. All right? Not everyone can ever win the Van Cliburn. But every one of us in this room, if we decided to put the time in, could be better than we are. All right? And saying, I've just never been able to learn an instrument. I didn't try, but let's set that aside. Okay? Same thing is true about learning people's names. It is more difficult to put people I know some better in a box. I didn't say impossible. I'm working on it, honey. Okay? I have called Linda Kelly before. So, it happens. I'm still working on names, all right? At least I married somebody whose name ended in a short vowel instead of a long vowel, okay? And there are many other reasons, all right? So that's one of them. Ask questions of people more often than you make statements. And I, not just you, I. Any of you that know me know that's especially hard for me. I'm still working on it. It's been said, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and they should be used in that proportion. All right? I'm working on it. Number 3, understand the material difference between having a strong opinion and being opinionated. They are not the same. They are not the same. All right? How popular and effective in terms of influence are most opinionated people? Not terribly. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't people who don't rise to the heads of companies, the heads of states, the heads of whatever you want to pick. All right? But in terms of their ability to influence people effectively, and especially because we're not just talking about influencing people to raise shareholder price. We're talking about influence people for the kingdom. Opinionated people, for example, if they were in a business meeting or an organizational meeting of any kind, paid, unpaid, doesn't matter, and they hear an idea that doesn't sit with them, don't one tell themselves things like, well, I just tell it like it is. Nobody I've ever met that has ever said that, which includes me, actually behaves that way to everybody they interact with. All right? I do typically behave that way to people I put in a box. All right? So, instead of saying, wow, that's the dumbest idea I think I've ever heard. Either there are some reasonable things about that idea that I have concerns about, or there are not, number one. And a lot of that has to do with this box. But if there are, rather than, again, assuming I'm rock salt and giving myself permission to be, I would say something like, I'd like to hear more about that idea, and I'd like to share some of my concerns. Have I diminished my concern? Have I? No, I really haven't. I still have my concerns. And now the person can either talk more, I'm not telling you anything else, take it or leave it. Well, then the conversation has to change some. But even then, I could either say, well, if you're going to be a turkey about it, then I think it's dumb and I'm not voting for it. All right? I mean, but there may be things about it that are valuable if I get more information. Other kinds of phrases that many of us can be prone to that suggest I'm opinionated, I don't have strong opinions. Well, clearly, anyone could see. Absolutely. I mean, that kind of language, which therapists call, Christian and otherwise, terminal language. Okay? Who's ever made this statement in a relationship? You are always something. Anybody guilty of that? Okay, and the rest of you, we are talking about self-deception. Okay? Why is that so harmful to the situation? How many examples must I give you to blow your argument to smithereens? One. And how does it feel when your 9-year-old says, well, Mom, last week. Well, Dad, yesterday. And we can gripe all we want about, well, they should be more respectful. And in fact, there is value to respect. But part of the reason that second part really makes us frustrated is because we know they're right. All right? And so we want to be careful about that. And then the last thing that I would suggest about the box is to regularly and sincerely do something someone challenged me to do that's been impactful. And I will tell you, be careful what you ask him for, because God is faithful. And that is to pray the last 2 verses of Psalm 139 each evening and mean it. Who knows what those verses say? And I'm not trying to give you a church set. Trust me, the guy said it initially, and I'm like, I don't remember. David? Yeah. I mean, do I have the guts to do what David said the verses said? David repeated a little. Do we still have the catch box? Yeah. Say that a little. Here he comes, David. It's coming your way. Play like you're a goalie and catch it in the. There you go. Listen to what it says. Asking God this every night and meaning it.
Search me and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. See if there's any offensive way in me. Lead me in the everlasting way.
It's tempting to want to skip to that last phrase. Lead me into everlasting life. It's the things before it that are a problem. You know, God, show me every single time when I put people in the box. When I view them as an object differently than you view them. When I rationalize my actions. When I don't focus on growing me instead of growing them. Okay? That's when I have people in the box. Couple of others right quick. Take thoughts captive. Another one is stop living life alone. Okay? Stop living life alone. It's a path to change. It's not a path to freedom. There's a difference in being introverted and extroverted. I understand that. An extrovert might need to have 20 or 30 people they live life with. An introvert might need to have 2 or 3. Alone is a wrong way street, no matter my disposition. Accept and live out this truth. Perfection is impossible. Progress, steady and demonstrable progress is possible if I am indeed called according to his purpose, like Romans says. All right? You're gonna deal with people in the box. You're gonna put people in the box. I'm gonna put people in the box. Am I doing things in my life to mitigate the number of times I do that, or how long I keep them in there? The last thing, I'll say it quickly about this, and we'll go on to the last one because our time is getting short, and that is, remember what I call the life fraction. All right? Here's a crazy thing about when you're self-absorbed, all right, which is where I lived for many years. Sometimes God's like, he's an idiot, but I'm going to use him anyway. He doesn't really ever say that because I'm still an image bearer. Okay, but he's like, you're not good salt, but you know what? I need some salt in this situation. I'm going to use him anyway. All right? So part of my life involved being a consultant to business owners, specifically as it had to do with human capital and people. All right? And so it was not uncommon for small business owners, and I'm talking about employers 1,000 people and down, to call with questions about people problems. I mean, that was my job. And so they would call, and I'd say, yeah, I'll meet you at this time, whatever. And you know, I would sit down in front of them, men and women, and they'd say things like, you know, my business is failing because my employees are idiots. All right? Some of you are managers, may have actually said that. All right? We're not asked for a show of hands, but nevertheless. All right? And it struck me one day, because I'm trying to come up with something fancy or whatever. I mean, I'm going to charge them. And then it just hit me. This ain't complicated. And I used an example from life, but of course I never thought about my own backpack. So bear with me, because that will pop into some of your heads, okay? And I would say to them, you know, maybe that's true. Let's test it out. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you got idiots. I would say, give me the names. Can you think of the names of 5 right here without us looking at your personnel roster? Oh, heck yes. All right, again, men and women. All right, so I'd say, okay, what's one name? All right, so one name's Gary. What's the other name? One name's Bob. What's the other name? Well, one name's Brian. Just having some fun, man. One name is Sarah. We already saw from the story she was crazy. All right. And who's one other? One's Delilah. Okay. However you spell it. And then I would say, so, I mean, the person has Gary, Bob, Brian, Sarah, and Delilah for their employees. And then I'd say, I'm curious, who authorized the hiring of Bob? Gary, me. Okay, what about Bob? And a lot of times if they had a big organization, they say, well, ultimately me, I allowed it. And so we'd get right here, here's what I would end up with. And I literally got to where we would either write it on a piece of paper, or if they had a whiteboard in their office, we'd do that. And then I'd say, man, I hate to be blunt. It's going to sting to pay for this, but who's the idiot? And I wasn't trying to be arrogant. I actually probably was at that point. All right? But there's some truth to it. All right? There's some truth to it. And I started calling this the life fraction. And the reason I called it the life fraction, and I did finally use it on myself. Because before I used it on myself, I would bump into other people. And I'll give you a quick scenario that actually happened from when I was a sports official. And that was, they're all women's names here now, so we're going to add the Sarah and Delilah. It's only a 3-person deal. I had a colleague named James. We'll add Josie here just for fun, all right? And I was talking to James, and I said, man, how's it going? We were getting dressed, ready for a ball game. We were high school basketball officials together. He's like, man, it's kind of a tough time. I said, what's that? He said, well, me and Josie are getting divorced. I'm like, really? I'm sorry, what's wrong? He said, yeah, I've been divorced 2 other times. I thought I had this thing figured out. And I said, well, what do you think's causing the problem? I just can't find anybody that understands. I am a sports official. All right, now this was not his job. This is a hobby. Yes, you take a check from each game, but it was his hobby. And he officiated in football, basketball, and baseball. And he officiated over 200 nights a year. All right? Which, you don't even have to be good at math to know that's a lot of officiating. All right? And he's like, I just can't find anybody that understands I'm a sports official. And I said to him, even as somebody who was nuts myself, I said, I don't think it's them who doesn't understand. I don't think you don't understand that 200 nights of officiating a year, along with, by the way, he had a pretty decorated career. For those of you that don't know and think all refs are idiots, and I know we'd get some hands on that, or you're self-deceived, all right? There's camp. There's instructional camp, all right? A fair amount of it. There's a lot of watching tape. There's maintaining your uniform, all right? There's a lot that goes into it, all right? And so it was probably more like 250, right? Was it James who didn't understand? No. What was James ignoring? People didn't want to be married to somebody 50 nights a year or whatever, And when I say I applied it to me, one night it hit me like a bolt out of the blue in about 2000. I'd have to think, Brian might remember. I think it was in like 2014. And it hit me. Why don't I use the life fraction on me? And so I went to Brian and I thought, because the conclusion that I came to is, I don't know any more about dating at 50, whatever I was, 56, than I did at 16. Hadn't learned a darn thing and still behave very similar. All right? This is never going to change if God ever grants me the other opportunity to put into somebody to bump into somebody that can put up with this twang. It is never going to work if this part doesn't change. And so I said to Brian, would you help me figure this out? I was putting other people in the box. I was thinking that the problem was the people I was married to. They had some problems. But let me ask you, which partner for me would not have problems? None. There are no ladies without baggage. It's just a matter of how many and how small or large they are. All right? Which ladies, by the way, I'm not leaving men out of this. All right? There are no men, there are no knights in shining armor. There are only turds in tinfoil, as James used to say. All right, men, and its corollary that James and I agreed upon, although he would never use because he has a really strong bias toward men, is that there are no princesses. There are only peasants with poop on their face. All right? So it's a balance. There's only broken people. There's only broken people. So that's the box. All right. The second thing has to do with confusing a contributing factor to a problem and a root cause. Right? A contributing factor versus a root cause. And let me illustrate it this way. All right? When I was, I don't know, 12 maybe, Ken asked me one afternoon, I do call my parents Ken and Shirley because I'm a grown-up and they're a grown-up. All right? I'm not confused. They're still my parents. That's just what I call them. All right? And like, hey, we need you to go out, and I need you to go out and make sure those dandelions come out of the backyard. All right? I'm like 13. I'm like, this is not what I had in mind for my Saturday. And there were a fair number of them, so I'm thinking to myself, how quickly could I get this done? And I'm like, this is going to take me like 20 minutes. And so I got a hoe, and I just went through the backyard and whacked the top right off all of them. All right? It literally only took me 20 minutes. Why did I choose that method? It was easy. All right? It was quick. All right? It was what I wanted to do. Any of this sounding like those things we had written on the board a little while earlier? What do you think happened? What do you think the backyard looked like about 10 days later? Holy moly. I'm like, where did all these come from? And I was really not even paying attention. Actually, it was Ken who asked me to look at the backyard. All right? Now, the thing that I would ask you, because it gets back to something we said, if I had returned to the backyard from the backyard as quickly as I did, what are some of the things parents would be prone to say that, by the way, may be partially self-deceptive or give some evidence of self-deception? What are some of the normal things parents would say in that scenario? Why didn't you do what I asked you to do? Okay, what else? Why are you back already? What else? What were you thinking? Oh my gosh. To which, I'm stunned. I never had the thought to say, what do you think I'm thinking? I'm a teenager. I'm not thinking. You told me to get rid of them. They're gone. Okay. All right. So, we would have a tendency to say that rather than ask questions. Okay. Because what are you thinking? And thank you, Melanie, for being honest. All right. Most of us have said that. I know I've said that to my teenagers, and it wasn't any more effective with them than it was with me. All right? My dad's not perfect. He's not perfect. All right? Even as a believer, he's not perfect and a Christ follower. And a very good example as an image bearer. But he did say something like that. Right? You think that's going to take care of it? Well, and guess what? Number one, I'm like, looked like it did. And number two, at 13, I don't care what the backyard's going to look like in 10 days. I just want to be out of there now. And so unfortunately, by putting me in the box, he's a kid, he's young, he's dumb, he did it too quickly, on and on and on the box goes. That doesn't mean I shouldn't get information, but do you see where I'm going with that quick response and how that does? What it literally incented in me. My sister Kendra is very different. But what it incented in me was more earnest. Like, oh yeah, you want to see me do that? I don't know what I did in response to that, but that was kind of my response following a disagreement we had at 14. When I made a vow that I would never take instructions from anyone else ever again, but I would always be clever about how I did it so they didn't know until some later point. Now, what thing did I deceive myself about that I was what person did I deceive myself and forget that I was leaving out of that vow, which I lived until I was 52 years old? Who was I leaving out? And this is a church answer. I didn't realize that, and I was largely unconscious, that I meant my vow, and okay, God's word said immorality is a bad idea. It seems fun. I think I'll do it anyway. I mean, my parents also thought it was a bad idea, but I wasn't just leaving what they thought out of it. I was leaving out the source, and I was like, oh, that friend doesn't think it'd be a good idea. Well, I'll unfriend them. Well, you couldn't unfriend people in 1975, but you get the gist. All right? So I was leaving everybody out of it. So back to I chose the method because it was easy. Those are the things we'd said. It puts me in the box. One of the things that happens again is we confuse contributing factors. Contributing factors, well, I was young. I did hate yard work. I wasn't thinking. I mean, those are contributing factors to the problem I created themselves. But they weren't root causes, okay? There wasn't any conversation about why I didn't like work and some of those kinds of things. And again, I'm talking about being a permissive parent. I'm just talking about learning to ask questions, and there's a greater and greater amount of information. That doesn't mean because I said so is never an appropriate response. Remember, we're avoiding terminal language. But it does mean I need to be very, very careful about how I use it. You know, it's like arsenic. I'm not saying you couldn't put it in any recipe. I would say you'd probably want to be very cautious, and you'd want to read the recipe very carefully, or you might get tasty cake in debt. So let's talk about some things that happen when we do things quickly, and I want to give you some specific examples in addition to that, because root causes get below the problems, okay? So here's an example when I was an adult, or was I? And that is, there was a woman who lived above me at the Huntington Glen Apartments after we moved out. And one night, or one morning actually, about 2 o'clock, the first woman who lived above me had 2 teenage daughters, and they fought all the time. Loudly, morning, noon, night. I'm not sure what they were dropping or whether they were not catching things they were throwing at each other, but it was scary living below them, all right? I never did anything. I did what most men do. I was passive, okay? Whew. The lady got a new job. They moved, okay? Problem solved. New person moves in. I see them. Mom, small kid. They've lived there about a week. 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear boom, 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 boom. So I try the official, most effective trick. I like hit my ceiling from the bottom. You know, that certainly solves fellow tenant problems. It doesn't do anything. The next night, the same thing happens. You know, maybe tonight's different. I try it again, nothing happens. So the third night, I'm like, doggone it, no more of this. I'm taking matters into my own hand. I stomp up there in my gym shorts and my T-shirt at 2 o'clock in the morning. I pound on that door like I'm law enforcement or some other, person that would have a right to do that. And the woman cracks open the door. I'm like, what is the problem up here? Did you not hear me banging on my ceiling? I mean, what is all the noise? Well, my son is, a little bit wound up, and he's, jumping off his bed. Well, you need to get him in line. I'm embarrassed to tell you that's literally what I said. And she's like, you need to leave. Bam! Shut the door. Actually, an appropriate response to the approach I used. All right? Did I solve the problem? No. It was really noisy for several more minutes. Did I have the right to speak to her about the noise? Surely I did. But did I put her in a box? And was I confusing a contributing factor? Maybe as an adult, she could have controlled the situation differently with the root cause of why the little boy was misbehaving. And the answer is yes. What I found out about, because about a week later, I saw her out there as a person. I saw her outside our apartment and just below our apartment, and she was talking with another lady that had a bicycle. And I happened to be walking by, and she said something about, I want to teach my son to ride his bike. And for whatever reason, you know, I was lucid for a moment, and I said, "Oh, is that your little kid we were talking about?" And I'm so fortunate she didn't just like punch me in the nose. And she said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, it was." And I said, "Hey, what's his name?" Because I love kids. And she said, "His name's Braxton. He's 5. And she said, "You know, his dad and I separated about 2 months ago, and we moved here to California, and he's having a really hard time adjusting, and he's really sad, but the one thing that seems to light up his face is learning to ride a bicycle." And I said, "Hey, I got some kids. They love kids. Maybe we can help you." 2 weeks ago, I taught Braxton to ride a bicycle. Ashton, Alexis, and Andrew helped him. The woman who has a name, and it's Tony, became our friend 2 weeks ago. I got a text from my daughter, Ashton. Tony and Braxton lived above us for 4 years. They decided to move back to California. She had been a very high-level executive assistant in the California University system, couldn't find anything pitched at that level here that met her schedule and allowed her to work with Braxton, whose dad lived in California. She said he needs the opportunity to see his dad, whether he and I ever got along, because his dad is his dad. So she moved back to California. We were so sad. But it was the right decision for Tony. 2 weeks ago, in spite of their dad's efforts to almost never let that relationship get in my daughter Ashton sent me a message, what do we call it? A text. It's the big words that stump me. A text. And she said, "I saw on Facebook Braxton graduated from high school. Let's have a road trip and go see him." All right? Now, not every part of Ashton's life is where I wish it was, to be transparent. But think about the memories my own broken-hearted kids nearly missed because their dad was confusing. "Oh, it's noisy. That's the problem. What's the problem? The idiot upstairs won't make her kid behave." No, that was a contributing factor. The root cause of the noise was the kid was brokenhearted. She was in survival mode. You know, that was like a root cause. In safety and risk management, root causes are what are called 5 whys or 7 why exercises, right? So let me give you one more, and then we'll go along. We'll give you some quick tips, and we'll wrap up for today. All right? Think about the Challenger and the Columbia catastrophes. Everybody know what we're talking about? The space shuttles that tragically blew 7 really talented people out of the sky. Right? What caused the Challenger to go down? What's that? Okay, faulty pieces inside of the machine. Okay, a leaky O-ring, which is what Michelle is talking about. Is that what really caused? Nathan's already heard this story because he's in engineering. All right? That was a contributing factor. The weather was a contributing factor. Things like speed were a contributing. There are a host of contributing factors. Almost all of them you saw spoken about on the news in the days shortly after the incident. Because our tendency, even as image bearers, is to do the work that's easy, get the answers that are quick, think we've solved the problem, and go on. It is literally the only American philosophy. If you talk to philosophers, Americans invented the philosophical way of thinking called pragmatism. And the problem with pragmatism is it often solves one problem and causes 3. But it does so fairly quickly. Okay? Because Nathan is right. NASA batted it back and forth. They convened their own internal commission for 90 days and said, there is some public pressure to get this straightened away. And in the unlikely event, and by the way, there's been a fascinating book written about it called The Elephant in the Room, that we may possibly be wrong, that the O-rings won't solve this problem. Let's bring in objective, third-party investigators and let them take a crack at it. That consulting firm was called in. They had 2 or 3 meetings, and they came into a meeting, and they literally said, look, probably again not this diplomatic, cut the nonsense. What really blew this thing up? You're smart people. We've not heard anything yet that we haven't already heard. What blew this thing up? And was there any information that suggested it might happen? And almost like my cell phone, a person in the room said, well, there was a memo a junior engineer sent several years ago that mentioned that at low temperatures, the O-rings contracted and liquefied fuel might escape, or vaporized fuel, whatever it is, Nathan. You get the technical part. Whatever it is, will escape, and it will cause the thing to blow up. But it kind of died 2 or 3 levels up the chain. And they said, really? Does anybody else remember that? And basically everybody in the room was like, well, I might have seen that. Maybe. Okay? And so, as Nathan said, the root cause of the Challenger accident was that a known problem was completely ignored. Because, why was it ignored? What happened in terms of self-deception that we've already talked about? They put the junior engineer in the box. What does he know? What does she know? It was actually a young man, but it doesn't matter. It could have been either. What do they know? They just got out of college. We just gave him their orientation tour like 3 years ago. The guy can't possibly know what he's doing. Besides, he's assigned to a team that does dumb stuff. Okay? Whatever they said about him. But they were seeing the person as the junior engineer, an object, versus, hey, he's not from around here. Maybe he has a perspective we're missing. I mean, Derek mentioned last night, talking about phase 2, conversations with people, unless I misunderstood this and I'm self-deceiving. Hey, sometimes people come here, they've never been here. And they said, anybody ever said the bathroom smell bad? Wow, how'd you build this building? And you apparently built a nice building around a 1965 bathroom. How'd that work? Okay? Well, we could have said, hey, do you know the amazing stuff we do here that they don't do at other places? Just go in there and go to the bathroom and shut up. Okay? We could have said that. And who knows? It appears from what Derek said, we did say that for like 15 years. It wasn't phrased quite that way. We're like, well, oh, okay. They must have spoken to James. Okay? And so, I mean, again, people get thrown into the box. Now, here's what's crazy. Remember the Abram, Sarai, Egypt, Abraham, Sarah, Abimelech story? Which suggested low levels of learning, okay? Or low levels of ownership of learning. That would be perhaps the more way to go. Anybody heard of Columbia? Okay? What brought Columbia down over East Texas? Nathan? I mean, NASA already killed 7 people by avoiding information about a problem. What was the information that NASA had about the space shuttle? Hey, at certain high temperatures, ice forms on these heat tiles. We've already seen instances where big chunks of ice fly off. Man, if one of those chunks of ice ever hits the wrong place, it's going to penetrate that heat shield, and we're going to have crispy fried talented people. What happened? That very thing. And the only thing left to be debated for, I'm sure, 2 very uncomfortable weeks or so, whatever the 10 days, 2 weeks, I don't remember how long that was up there. What was the only thing NASA had to debate, really? And actually did. the record now shows. What do they have to debate during that period? They saw a heat tile with ice on it fly off and strike another part of the heat shield. Again, it's going hundreds, if not thousands of miles an hour. What did they know had likely occurred? All we were waiting on, and I mean this is blunt and it's sad, it is gut-wrenching. Crispy fried, talented people. That's all they were debating. Do we tell them or don't we? Now, I'm sure there was some frantic trying to figure out, is there any way we can help them? But this ain't Mission Impossible, okay? Tom Cruise couldn't parachute out of a plane and fly down there and grab somebody else. This isn't Avengers. Once that big piece of ice. And so what does that say? Challenger was it just was wasted. I mean, 7 incredibly talented people died for nothing. All right? That ain't the first time we've done that. And I mean, I wouldn't want to live any place but here. Anybody see some of the pictures from the end of the Vietnam War and the end of the war in Afghanistan? Anything about people hanging on to flying aviation equipment in one and flying aviation equipment in another ever prompt you to say, we did all that and we didn't learn much? We still didn't know what to do with indigenous people who might be friend, might be foe, might help us, might kill us. We didn't learn much. Why? Because that's what we do as people. We deceive ourselves. We deceive ourselves. So how do we keep from, confusing root causes? All right? Root causes, poor decision making. One of the reasons most organizations don't do root cause analyses is this. I was working with a client. They'd had an occupational fatality. Okay? We're not talking about an employee who's formerly employed. We're talking about an employee who's formerly living. All right? And I said, we need to do it, because they're like, we've been here 16 years and we've never had this happen. We're clearly, that's literally the word, the man who was we're clearly safe. I just asked him. And he's clearly dead. What happened? Well, and he went on and on and on and on. I said, we need to do a root cause analysis. We got to call our attorney first. Call the man. His name was John. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're not doing a root cause analysis. Why is that? Well, I think I know a little bit about them, and we may have to look at organizational factors. Well, and they said, our attorney says no. May I please just speak with him over lunch? And when I did, what we talked about was, okay, you're right. If we do a root cause, we are almost certainly going to find some organizational factors. Because nobody gets up one morning and says, that's kind of rough. I think I'll get myself electrocuted. People don't say that. Not many. Not healthy ones. Not even sort of healthy ones. But a guy got electrocuted. All right? So I said, which do you think would be more problematic? Because he's like, OSHA will find out. And I was also engaged by them to help them keep from getting a big OSHA fine and that kind of stuff. And I said, which do you think you could more easily defend if they get sued? We did a root cause analysis. Here are some of the things we are accountable to, and here's what we are doing to fix them materially. Or, it just happened. He's like, I don't know, I got to think about that for a day or two. He called me back and he said, I want to see one of these things. I've got to be present and I'm going to bill them for my time. I said, I'll ask them. They'll either say yes or no. They did, because he called me back and he said, sometimes that other approach, which I've used to great personal gain, is bothersome to me. I at least want to see this. And we went to OSHA and we said to them, and I'm humbled to tell you, even as a crazy guy, they said, we've never heard of that. That's where being creative and imaginative will get you sometimes when God is just working in spite of you. I said, here's what we'll do. They had said we were going to get fined like $250,000. And I asked the director, what if, rather than you getting the check, we committed to investing the money over the next 3 years in creating a safety program that would reduce the likelihood this would ever happen in Tarrant County again? If you know anything about OSHA, you send them a $250, and I'm not taking death lightly, by the way. But you pay OSHA a check in Tarrant County, it goes straight to Washington, D.C., and it ain't ever going to do much good at all in Tarrant County. All that office can be able to do is check the box and say, we find the people. All right? And here's how powerful truth is. That's what we did. We agreed that it could include uninvited audits at any time during that 3 years, and we would send them payment for safety-related things anytime they asked. The attorneys kicking and screaming the whole time. 16 months later in Dallas, a guy's arms got blown off. All right? He made contact with primary voltage. He got burned so badly, his arm, they didn't get blown off. That was a bad metaphor. He got burned so badly that he lost his arms and his eyesight. All right? Now you're thinking to yourself, man, I bet that company doesn't even exist anymore. They got sued OSHA fined them so heavily that second time they don't even exist. I had to go sit in front of Catherine Delaney, the regional director at OSHA, and I said, here are the things we discovered in our root cause from the last incident. Because her first question, as you might guess, was, what's the problem? I thought we had this fixed. And I said, we're working on it in these tangible ways to this impact thus far. It wasn't going to get fixed overnight. 16 years worth of bad habits don't get fixed immediately. Ever heard that in recovery or sanctification? Okay. Ever heard that, Abraham? All right. It doesn't happen overnight. And literally she said to us, that makes sense. That makes sense. You know I'm going to have to levy a fine of some kind, but I will allow you to do the same thing with this fine. I will fine you. In both cases, the OSHA fine was $10,000. Okay? But our commitment was to invest the amount they originally proposed back into the organization to deal with the root causes. Does that make sense? And that's not to be boastful to me. I'm just saying we have to look at root causes. So how do we do that? You know, I reduce self-deception personally, professionally, individually, collectively by being better at looking for the root causes rather than chopping the heads off the dandelions and deceiving myself into thinking the problem is fixed. 16 years of bad safety culture. I remember coming in, the guy said, we have a safety meeting twice a year. And I mean, my mind was thinking, wow, you got to be kidding. How could this happen? You're doing 1,000 Encore tickets on distribution level voltage a week, and somebody got shocked. Who knew? All right? Well, they'd been having that for like 10 years because the first 6 years they opened, nobody even thought about safety. I mean, it's a man's job, kind of the way they thought about it. You work hard, you do scary work, you play hard at night. I mean, it was stunning when I started finding out how many people were drunk, hung over till about 11 o'clock in the morning, and they're working on primary level voltage. But that was that industry. So to be having a safety meeting twice a year to them seemed like, man, we've revolutionized this joint. Until it killed someone. And when I left, after 12 years of the honor to get to work together, we not only had them once a week, but they had gone to Encore. And they got to be an Encore vendor when Encore reduced contractors from 1,000 to 24. And they started in a 21-year-old guy's apartment with a truck he bought for $1,000 at an auction. And when it was reduced to 2,000 after a leverage buyout, they were one of the ones that remained. And they went to OSHA and said, but once a quarter, we won't get to our tickets until noon because we're going to have a safety meeting, one in Fort Worth and one in Mesquite, where we gather all of our employees together so production will stop until noon that day. And Encore initially was angry. Our customers won't stand by this. And we were able to say, but wait, on several jobs recently, you told us, you wrote into your presentation that you worked with contractors like us because of how seriously we took safety. We're confused. And they're like, oh, yeah, we did. Okay, make sure everybody's out in the field by noon. But it took us 9 years to get there. So we won't always get past it, but we've got to be better at doing that. Root cause analysis allows a couple of things, and here are some quick tips. And those quick tips are these. Number one, I have to desire to actually solve the problem. If you've been here any length of time, for most of that requires this. I have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. I have to decide the cost of not actually solving the problem is more than the cost of whatever it takes to fix it. Number two, and related, is I have to be willing, and I got this exact question from Brian Duncan, okay? And he will remember. I was over in his old office, which is now, I don't know what, something over in the youth building, all right? And I remember sitting in this kind of odd chair and him asking me 2 weeks after my kid's mom, Kelly, and I separated, are you willing to do, and I mean at this time, he barely knew my name and I barely knew his name. I just knew the poo had hit the fan. And I could already tell this ain't going to work out well for my kids. And I also knew I had a huge part of it to play in what was going to happen. And he looked at me straight in the face when he still barely knew me, and he said, are you willing, Bart, to do whatever it takes to get to a different place? And I was thinking in my mind about what somebody had asked me a week prior who I had known 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, we met at a track and field project at a national youth track meet where we were going to be on a video live stream for 6 days together. He gave me his name. His name is Mike Evans, Mike Caldwell, pardon me. He lives in Florida. And he said, it strikes me, Bart. He said, we've known each other about 5 minutes, and you've said you need a miracle 3 times. He said, I'm convicted to ask you a question. He said, what if the miracle means your family fails, but you are transformed? And I looked at him, and I still remember thinking in my head, you crazy SOB, you don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I don't know why I ever talked to you. And then I was thinking, man, it's going to be a long 7 days. Okay. But you know what? That's what happened. That's what happened. And part of it is because up to that time, I had not been willing to do the things necessary to begin to get to a different place. All right? Still working on it. But what happens there is I have to be willing to deal with whatever the short-term pain is to get to the long-term gain. And here's how that happens quickly in a couple more points, and we're going to wrap up. I'll be happy to answer whatever questions you have after everybody's been released, or at the end. I'll leave that choice to you. And that is, we have to understand the difference between, I have to understand the difference between the pain of destruction and the pain of rehabilitation, or I will deceive myself about how to move forward. I know you're shocked, but I have a quick story as an example. All right? When I was in college, my freshman year, I was playing flag football. Remember, when I graduated from high school, you're thinking, remember, I don't even know you. So let me just give you this fact. When I graduated from high school in the spring of 1978, I was an inch shorter than I am now, thus 6'3", and I weighed 95 pounds less than I weigh now. All right? When I graduated from high school in the spring of 1978, I was 6'3", and I weighed 105. okay? I looked more suited to being a down marker than a football player, okay? A javelin than a track participant. In the spring, you know, the wind would get up and people would be like, whose days to hold on to Castle, okay? So, I mean, in a flag football game that this misfit group of guys at the church that I was in the college group from was beating a team that had won this division of the intramural flag football the year before. And with about 3 seconds left, they could tell the Bad News Bears of ACU flag football were going to win this division. And literally, one of my buddies heard a big guy on their team say, everybody pick one and just blow them up. Forget that it's flag football. Everybody just get a last lick in. I didn't hear that, or I would have been out of there. Concede the touchdown. We've already got the T-shirt. And a guy blasted me and broke my wrist. Well, I thought, because he hit me in the air, I mean, you fly a fair amount when you don't weigh but 105 pounds. And when I landed, I did that, and it broke my wrist. But I'd never had a broken bone. So I just thought it was jammed. So I'm like pulling on it, seeing if I think it's jammed. You know, I get back to the dorm, and I'm telling my buddy, hey, I think my wrist is jammed. It kind of hurts. Here, pull on it. See if you can help me. And I mean, you know, it's just making it worse. And by the middle of the night, my roommate, Steve Mack, still one of my close friends, is like, look, dude, you're going to the doctor in the morning, but you're going to shut up between then and now. Okay? I cannot sleep because my wrist was hurting. Long and short, my wrist was broken. It had to be cast above my elbow for some reason because it wasn't supposed to turn. Well, it had to be cast for 8 weeks. And I could not wait to not look like a waiter anymore. Okay? So I'm telling the doctor as he's sawing the cast off, I'm telling you, buddy, the moment this thing is off, I am dropping my arm. And he's like, you won't. You won't. Your arm, you're still going to look like a waiter for about another 6 weeks. If you don't do these exercises I'm going to give you, I'm going to put you through them. Then your roommate is going to have to help you with them because they are going to be very, very painful. And I said, not doing them. He said, and you'll have a waiter arm for the rest of your life. I'm like, well, okay. I'm like, let's give it a try. Tears ran down my face, all right? The exercises for about 3 weeks that I had to do 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. My roommate started bolting early for breakfast, so I'd have to, schlep from door to door to find somebody who'd finally help me. But nevertheless, they hurt at least as badly as when I landed. I hated those things. It wasn't until I was dealing with people with occupational injuries, they'd be injured at work, we'd send them to a PT that we knew was a good PT, not the K clinic. All right? And they would miss their appointment. And I would call, I'd say, hey, I understand you missed your appointment. What happened? That guy hurt me. I'm not going back. That hurt me. It hurt worse than when my knee got hurt. And it dawned on me again, because God is gracious regardless of where most people are. The person is misunderstanding. And believe me, I had no idea I'd ever be sharing this with anybody. The person is misunderstanding because maybe they hadn't had a lot of education. I worked in a chain of fast food restaurants. Many of our employees didn't have a lot of education. They didn't have a lot of people around them who had education. And I had them in a box because of it. They misunderstand that the pain of rehabilitation and, the pain of destruction and the pain of rehabilitation often hurt the same. What's the difference? The outcome. The outcome. And so one of the things root cause is about is understanding things that look similar but are different. All right? I mean, let's be real. I may have a friend who is left-leaning as left-leaning. Guess what? They don't stamp out of a mold. They're image bearers. Why? Because I said to make you uncomfortable, I don't make this stuff up. It's in God's Word. They're image bearers. They may be similar to the other person. Have I done anything to determine what the difference is? And if it's material? Because if I don't, I'll just keep making those assumptions. And guess what? I may miss something. Okay? Which shuttle am I going to blow out of the sky? Over and over and over again. Because I'm not looking at root causes instead of contributing factors. All right? The other thing that we can do is we can subject our feelings to rigorous examination by other people who are more objective than we are about a scenario, about our children, about our work, about our relationships, about unbelievers. All right? I just read an article the other day out of Harvard Business Review, and it said the same thing I heard one time a counselor say, not to me. They'd said it to a couple of mine. They never had conflict, but they were about to divorce. And the guy said to him, if you never have conflict, one of you is unnecessary. What's the problem with the divorce? Okay? He was basically saying, you're going to have conflict. You're humans. You're Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah. If they didn't have, surely when he asked the third time, that one's not in the Bible. All right? He either said to himself, man, I'm dumb as a post. I'm going to lose this beautiful woman. Or she said, you're dumb as a post. You're going to lose me. Either way, there is no recorded third time. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it's not recorded. And it looks like it might have been recorded had there been one. All right? So something has to change. I have to be, and that is why I for the longest time, I thought accountability to Brian Duncan was nerve-wracking because he might tell somebody. Might somebody in accountability tell someone? I'm not saying is it our preference. I'm saying might it happen? Yeah. Why? Because they're human. What was I deceiving myself about? That was saying, and somebody, I think it was Jessica, joked about it over here when we were talking about Abraham and Sarah and the like. Okay, what was I deceiving myself about that it was so that Brian, accountability with Brian was so dangerous? Who was I counting on to be my protector? Brian! He's built bigger than I am, okay? He did not graduate weighing 105, okay? He was muscular. He can't be my protector. Does that mean I want him to tell everybody? No, and to the best of my knowledge, he never did. If he did, guess what? I should have thought about that before I did those crazy things I told him. Does that make sense? Yep. The problem was I was saying, man, I don't know about this accountability. I don't think I really need it. I could probably figure this myself out. At what point? But I was deceiving myself into thinking that Brian was my protector. I started making real progress when I'm like, he might tell somebody. He's going to do his best. He's a human. You're not telling him to help him or put more pressure on him. You're telling him to demonstrate to God that you believe he will protect you. But I wasn't looking at root causes. I was looking at contributing factors. Oh, my getting well will depend on Brian not telling anybody. People that knew me even reasonably well already knew I was a goofball. That wasn't going to change because you can learn from history, but you can't rewrite it. So I have to be willing to be in rigorous communication with people, and that's why we talk about accountability so much here. I would simply say, Derek owes me no money, neither does Derek, and neither does Brian. And that is, if I'm not in accountability, you're in an accountability, I am deceiving myself about what I might or might not be capable of. Period. And another thing that I would say that may sound reasonably controversial, I hope not though, if I'm married, that person cannot entirely be my spouse. My spouse should not have the responsibility. We're not talking about hiding secrets, but I ought to have somebody that I can bounce a crazy idea off of without making my spouse think, I married him. What? Okay. Or becoming unsettled in some other material way. All right. So, as a Christ follower, finally, image bearing effectively and with the lowest possible amount of self-deceit, I would argue, number one, requires a willingness to take God's word seriously. And number two, it requires the diligence to to spend time in the Word so that I move beyond the VeggieTales veneer. There's some crazy stuff in God's Word. It is exhilarating to read sometimes. You're like, we really are like, these really are my people. Look at these Israelites. They're nuts. I'm among friends. All right? But you got to get past, oh, Abraham was so faithful. He just said, yes, God, I'm going right up that hill. I've waited for this cat for 114 years, but I'm going up there. Are you nuts? That can't be the way that happened. I'm going to grab him, I'm going to slit his throat and burn him up. Come on. But I have to spend the time to get past that and say, what is this story about? What is this crazy Lamech guy? Why is this in here? This story about Abraham and Sarah, what is this for? Oh, he's just so faithful. Come on, man. Are you kidding? Even after he got that promise, he spun that weird deal with his wife, and they both bought it again. No, I got to be willing to spend time in the Word. And I'm thankful here that I've been challenged to do that. And until about 5 years ago, I'd never read the Bible front to back. And having done so a number of times, one of the things that I know is God's Word is two things. Number one, it is 1,100 pages of a remarkable love story, including how much God loves me as an image bearer, as salt, even tempted to be self-deceptive. And number two, it's 1,100 pages that say, Bart, if you think you'll never be tempted to do it again, think about your great, many-time great spiritual uncle Abe. Okay? That was quite a tale he told Sarah, and he told it twice. So don't leave yourself out. Think about your cousin Paul, a fellow image bearer, a fellow salt person who said, man, I got to wrestle with this all the time. I hope today that the opportunity to visit with you has been helpful, has given you some things to think about. But I want to do one last thing, and I'm quite serious about it. And that is, I want to deputize each of you, as goofy as that sounds. Primarily men, but even women in appropriate settings. All right? I want to deputize you as a Christ follower, as an image bearer, as salt, who's prone to self-deception. I've shared that with you honestly. I want to deputize, and I don't want to, I am deputizing each of you to hold me accountable to the things that we've talked about today in my choices toward you, toward this body, and toward any other thing we talk about in my life. All right? I'm not all that. Sometimes my cell phone goes off. Today, I will close by telling you, at the break, my sweet wife, who is evidence, tangible evidence of God's grace to me, as are each of you, she said, honey, I turned your cell phone down. I knew I left it laying on the table. I thought, you would think if anybody in this room would have turned their cell phone down, all it would have taken, and I would have never gotten you back, you'd have been laughing so hard, and you too would never have forgotten this day, and I would have been a cautionary tale in yet another area of life. But I'm going to ask you to hold me accountable. I have other people, but if you see me behave in a way that's unbecoming of an image bearer and of salt, to let me know. Bluntly, tactfully, I don't care. I want to be free. I want to be free. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the prospect of freedom because of the cross. Thank you for these other image bearers and all the others that are part of our church, part of our community, part of our nation and part of our world. I confess, Father, I'm not always an effective image bearer. I put people in boxes. I jump to contributing factors. And I forget stories that you've told me about real people in your word that said, I'll do that. Choosing instead my own way, or believing I can hide behind some bush, metaphorically or perhaps factually, when I can't. Be with each of us. Help us to want to be free and to use the tools that will allow us to walk into perfection and enjoy freedom, helping others see and experience that as well. In your Son's name, amen.
Thank you, brother.
Oh, can I mention one other thing?
Please.
One other thing I want to mention is there is a powerful reference. It's not God's word, but there is a powerful consulting firm called the Arbinger Institute, and they've written an entire book called Leadership and Self-Deception, from which some of this material came. It's a really in-depth discussion of this topic, and I would commend it to you. I think enough of it, but I've committed to read it myself once a year. That doesn't trump God's word, but it's a helpful resource, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention it.
Awesome. Thank you again very much. One more round of applause. Don't forget your phone. Don't forget your phone. I don't want to get stuck with that thing. Seems a bit cursed. You know, I was left with just a few thoughts on today's talk, and one of them is that I think it really was a nice dovetail out of Chris's message on Sunday. And what I mean by that is that when I begin to come out of self-deception and into reality, into truth, it positions me to act by faith, by taking God at His word, and that is sometimes a scary, in fact, oftentimes a very scary prospect, right? Coming into truth, coming into reality can be terrifying. And something that Chris mentioned in that message was that there is this sort of hesitant obedience that we can practice, where we're not really sure if this is where or what we're supposed to be doing or how this is going to play out. There's not a lot of answers ahead, but I know that if I do it, even if I'm hesitant, there's still obedience in it. And then he also talked about fearful obedience, that I may be certain that, living by faith and doing what God is calling me to do and coming out of self-deception is going to be painful, and yet it is still obedience when I take God at His word. So I thought that was a really excellent sort of dovetail out of the discussion Sunday, what we did today. The second thing I'll say is I think it moves very, very nicely into tomorrow. With regard to this new sermon series, because the reality is, and you're going to hear me talk about this for several weeks coming up, is that the reason why certain coffee cup verses end up being put on the side of coffee cups is because I believe we want to self-deceive into thinking that God wants things for us and from us that are just simply not true. And that when we really evaluate what the intended message of so many coffee cup verses is, it's really more for my benefit and my glory and not God's. And so I'm really excited tomorrow to jump into that. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that tomorrow's message in particular, I'm not going to give away what we're going to be talking about, but that it plays right into this. That through this, I love the distinction between pain from destruction and pain from rehabilitation, and that when we move into this rehabilitating process, it is painful. It is hard. There are things that we do not want to face, and yet, if we will allow God to move us through it, on the other end of it is His glory and our good. And there is great hope in that. And so I just love seeing how, the Holy Spirit moves through. We did not plan, any of these things to kind of connect together. But when you're talking about truth, it all connects together. And so very, very fortunate, I think, today to hear from Bart and hear from his experience. Certainly he's got a lot of it that is so fruitful, so profitable for us as leaders. And I like that he called you all out on that. You are all leaders, whether you like it or not. You are all salt because Jesus says so.